Well, Vladimir Putin's got two problems that he didn't have before. The first is that surge you just saw on the screen in terms of an extraordinary number of cases of coronavirus developing in Russia after Putin initially delegated the response to his aides and told people that everything would be fine. The second problem he's got is that Russia has less money to pay for a response to corona. So because of the stoush that Putin initiated earlier this year with Saudi Arabia and the United States over oil, the oil price has plummeted. It's also been accentuated by coronavirus, and therefore Russia is so heavily dependent on oil. 50% of its government budget comes from oil sales. Doesn't have the long-term funding to deliver the economic relief that Russia needs. That causes a problem for President Putin.
Well, it's a huge one, isn't it, when we saw them? Yes, it was mainly storage problems that it actually went to negative, but when will that demand get back? What's the canary in the coal mine here, James? What will be a real indication that he might be losing his grip on power?
Well, we've seen some polling indicating a drop in support for the president. His numbers on approval for his response to the coronavirus are less than 50%. We've seen a decline in support for him personally. The real canary in the coal mine would be an increase in protests about the economic situation across Russia. People are worried about their jobs. The government has a pretty hefty fund it can use to provide an immediate relief to the economic impact of coronavirus, but there are long-term questions over its ability to prop up the economy. So that will manifest in protests, but there's still no clear successor. The biggest challenge for Putin is that he planned to put through constitutional reforms this year that would allow him to extend his term beyond 2024, and that now looks to be off the agenda until coronavirus is dealt with.
Yeah, and then it might be difficult if it's not dealt with all that well. Turning our attention to China, it's keen to show that it's at least getting back on track, its economy and its industries as well, including defence. A fascinating article appearing about a new stealth vehicle that could even reach all the way to Australia with a high payload, as the terminology goes. This is about really trying to exert influence in the region.
Well, the fact that China can strike Australia if it chooses to, or has the technical ability to strike at Australia, isn't new, but they are planning to unveil a new stealth bomber that looks surprisingly and suspiciously like United States stealth bombers at an air show coming up this week. And that, again, is just a sign of how far China's military modernisation has come. But China is also concerned about the possibility of, some degree of confrontation with the United States in the near term. There's some reporting today on a report written for Chinese leaders by a think tank associated with the Ministry of State Security that points to a Tiananmen-style global backlash against China and the possibility that that might drive increased, possibly armed confrontation with the United States sooner rather than later.
Well, the other interesting aspect about this is that it does imply China's aware that what it's saying publicly about COVID-19 and its response and no need for a transparent look at things, even some officials going on the record and talking about this was the US somehow planting the virus. They know that this is not being swallowed by people around the world. Does it mean they're going to have to think a strategy beyond the usual denial and bluster?
Well, I think they've got to think twofold. How do they make sure that their own population is satisfied with their response to this crisis, both the immediate response from a health perspective, the medium-term response from an economic perspective, and the longer-term response from a strategic perspective. But one of the things the report really highlights is a concern that countries might start to reject China's Belt and Road Initiative. And we've already seen some calls in Australia in the last couple of days for Victoria's deal with China on the Belt and Road to be scrapped in the aftermath of this coronavirus crisis emerging from China. So it's that kind of initiative that they'll be looking for, that they'll be concerned about, because that has the potential to translate from international tension into domestic political tension for the Chinese leadership.
And on the US side, at the moment, if you have China obfuscating, it allows Donald Trump to make claims such as, well, this might have come out of a lab in Wuhan, deliberately or otherwise. there are many security agencies suggesting this is not the case, including Australia's and health experts as well, from what we know about testing in this seafood wet market. But for Donald Trump's domestic audience, it gives him the ability to sort of make this claim, does it?
And that's why you're seeing Secretary Pompeo being so forward-leaning in his remarks on where this virus emerged from. The reporting that he's relying on is not top-grade intelligence reporting. It's coming out of the Department of Homeland Security. You would expect, if this was a more credible theory, you would be seeing reporting from other US intelligence agencies. Australia's agencies don't seem, from what we've seen reported in the press, to share the same view as that DHS report. There is a small chance that it came from the Wuhan lab, but not conclusive evidence that it emerged from there. It remains most likely that it came out of the wet markets rather than some sort of scientific mistake. But this is a key electoral issue for the US now. We've seen PACs on both sides of the US political divide loading up ads talking about whether Biden is complicit with China or whether Trump is complicit with China. So it will be an issue in the election this year, and Trump knows he's got to get out ahead in front of it.
James Brown, always good to chat. Thank you.